Dad the Dungeon Master presents The Ruby Wizard from the dark horror fantasy anthology Dead Wizards Never Die by Rian Burnhouse. Read by the author. The rhythmic thump of liquid splashing on stone echoed throughout the chamber. Crust caked his eyelids together. He sat up, head throbbing, and scraped the gunk from his eyes. Through the pain in his head, he was having trouble remembering how he had ended up on the cold, stone floor. His ancient bones ached as he struggled to his feet. The world was a blurry mess. The thin chain that secured his glasses around his neck felt delicate, almost fragile, in his weathered fingers. With his glasses in place, the dimly lit room came into focus. He cast his gaze around, searching for the source of the dripping. The walls were worked stone bricks and lined with tables and shelves, all terminally infested with beakers and books.
Oh, yes.
His voice rattled from low in his throat between dry coughs.
That's right,
he said.
I was in the workshop working on my...
He sucked in his breath. He tottered his way across the lab to an elaborate device, a symphony of tubes and pumps. The dripping came from a loose panel on the side of the device. He dove to look at the containment chamber. Through the glass, he could see the uncut ruby held suspended in the center of the arcane box.
Excruciatingly inadequate again,
he croaked. There was a faint glow of energy coming from within the stone. Fractured memories came piercing through the fog. A pulse of energy had emanated from the machine, knocking him unconscious. Simply storing energy in a gemstone at all was a feat that would win him medals among his peers. But those mattered little to a man of his age. There was only one thing he thought about these days. The next couple of hours were spent cleaning and tinkering with the device. He thought on multiple occasions that he should probably stop to eat, but he was so close. There would be time to eat when the work was finished. Plenty of time. The machine took a lot of energy to power. It wasn't cheap. He would have to go get more fuel. From a desk by his door, he retrieved a heavy sack of coins, pocketed a few dozen, then replaced it. There wasn't enough there to keep running the machine like this. He pulled on a heavy coat and fur-lined boots. The door of his cottage groaned in protest as he wrenched it open and shuffled out into the snow. The snow-laden trees bowed before him. He addressed them with mock genteel, sweeping into a deep bow of his own.
At least some people appreciate genius,
he said. He braced against the chill winter wind and trudged into the woods. It was a long, dark trek down the mountain, and he needed to make it to town before the shops opened. The thatch-roof village huddled between two sharp peaks, like a hiker caught in a snowstorm. A house on a mountain seemed like a great idea 50 years ago when he had moved up here. Time just slips right through your fingers. The seclusion had been necessary, even then. Genius does not thrive in polite society. The trees were cut back a few hundred feet from the edge of the village, a precaution the town had diligently performed for decades, ever since a rogue wildfire had wreaked impartial devastation. Crossing the open expanse of snow between the forest and the town always made him feel uncomfortably exposed, even though, like now, he often made this crossing by starlight. The first trickles of sunshine were peeking over the edge of the eastern slope, the beams casting auburn paint across the rolling dunes of snow. The cleared streets of gleaming cobblestone bore witness to the townsfolk's stubborn refusal to give in to the icy grip of any frontier town's greatest foil, Mother Nature. Despite the cold, the effort of driving his old bones as hard as he could had left him sweating under his heavy coat. He loosened the neck as he reached the back of the town's blacksmith. Before he could even knock, a thickly muscled young man with singed bits in his beard stuck his head out the door. "Get out of here," he harshly whispered through gritted teeth. The old man hefted the pouch of gold, shaking it gently. "People have been asking questions," the boy said. "You didn't make it in time. The boss is already here." The old man swallowed, his throat sore from effort and cold.
I may not be able to make it tomorrow. I barely had the strength to get down here today. Please, this might be my last chance,
he said. He proffered the pouch of coins again and said,
"Think of your sisters."
The young man rubbed his face with calloused hands. "Fine," he groaned, "but this is the last time." The boy retreated through the door and returned a few moments later carrying a backpack that was so full it strained at its seams. He dropped the bag in the snow and held out his hand for the coins. The old man clutched the coin purse tighter.
"Well, help me put it on."
he rasped.
I'm too old to be lifting like that.
All right, the young man said as he glanced around nervously. He hoisted the backpack onto the old man's shoulders. Let's go, come on. Someone is going to see you, he begged. The blacksmith's apprentice roughly snatched the coins from the old man and half dragged, half carried him the first 20 feet up the frozen alley.
I get it, I'm going,
the old man breathed. He straightened himself, leaned forward to counterbalance the weight of the pack, and trudged through the snow. As he reached the end of the alley, a deep, resonant voice came booming from behind him.
Who are you talking to out there?
The deep voice said. Nobody, said the young blacksmith's apprentice.
Was it him again?
The voice bellowed. No, boss, The young man's voice was interrupted by the echoing sound of a meaty smack. The old man could read the writing on the walls. He cut between two buildings going straight for the edge of town. He wanted to break line of sight, but more than that, he needed room to work. Even pushing himself to his limit, he had only gotten halfway to the tree line when more than a dozen able-bodied townsfolk spewed from between the buildings behind him. This spot wasn't perfectly flat, but it would have to do. He dropped his pack roughly to the ground and shuffled frantically in circles around it, weaving intricate designs in the snow. From the pouch at his side, he pulled 2 glass containers filled with different hues of metallic liquid.
No time,
he grunted, the men bearing down on him. He smashed the glass containers together and threw the mix of metallic liquid, shattered glass, and blood straight up, raining it all over himself, the pack, and most importantly, his arcane sigils carved in the snow. The men were almost to him as he began chanting in the old tongue. He ripped open the top of the pack, revealing a shock of matted, dark brown hair. His voice reached a crescendo as he howled his incantation into the waning night. The glyphs began to glow, causing shadows to stretch and distort his elderly features. As the final syllables reverberated off the trees and buildings, the old man wrenched the hair-covered creature from the top of the bag. Out came the head and face of a beautiful young girl beneath waves of brown hair, her body still bound in the pack.
Bethany!
One of the men bellowed. As he brought his other bloody hand down to her face, the energy in the circle swelled up, engulfing them, filling his senses with infinite swirling sensations until his feet met abruptly with the floor of his workshop. The townsfolk knew where he lived. Until now they had only had suspicions, but now they had proof. They would already be on their way. A whirlwind of effort followed. He had minutes, not hours. He mixed the various ingredients to prepare the fuel. The energy source was no good unless it was prepared properly. From his window he could see as the torches approached. It wasn't the first time he had considered that this might happen. He paused his preparations long enough to go to the window and enact a wall of fire completely around his hut. That would buy him a few more minutes. He had been very careful with fire the last several years, but it was a little late to worry about setting the town on fire again. This had to work. There was no going back. The table, which was also a mirror, was ringed with arcane runes and candles of specific waxes, heating pans with specific oils. He placed the still unconscious young girl on the table, pulled a wand from the folds of his clothes, and waved it over her.
Samshik,
he wheezed. She woke up, coughing.
Where am I?
She said. Immediately she strained against her bonds, but to no end.
Where am I? What are you doing to me?
She yelled as she squirmed.
Sorry, young lady,
he said in calm contrast to her frantic screaming.
I'm very sorry, but you have to be awake or it won't work.
She kicked wildly in response.
Kurto!
He shouted as he flicked his wand at her. Her entire body locked in place, every muscle flexing against each other all at once.
Can't let you go rooting my perfect formula,
he said. Light flickered across the window, catching his attention. The townsfolk were right outside. They tossed a large sack to the ground in his yard. It made a squelching sound as it hit the hard-packed snow. No, it wasn't a sack. It was a bloody lump that used to be the blacksmith's apprentice.
It's over, wizard,
came the same booming voice from the alley.
Give us Bethany. Don't fight back like he did,
he said, motioning to the lump.
We will make it quick. You're going to be dead soon either way. Why make it harder on yourself?
He shouted. The large man paused for a few moments, expectant of a response. They wouldn't matter soon. His body would remain here, worthless. Unfortunately, hers would have to be consumed, a necessary sacrifice to sever his soul's tether to his body. The lever on the machine was heavy, but it moved smoothly once he got it going. Wham! They were slamming something into his door. He needed to focus. The young girl whimpered, tears running from the corners of her eyes as he moved one end of the device above her. Couldn't worry about that. If things went right this time, she would never end up in this situation. Wham! Bits of wood sprayed across the floor. One more of those and they were getting through. He connected the last of the hoses, gripped the final switch, and looked down at the terrified young girl.
I promise, this won't happen next time.
He growled as he threw the switch and ran to strap himself into the far end of the machine. Wham! The door was blasted off its hinges and flipped through the workshop. Large, shouting men came pouring through the void. The machine whirred loudly as sparks of blue arcane energy crackled all along it. The ruby at the machine's center was glowing brightly, bathing his entire workshop with a haunting red glow. That was a good sign. The mountain of a blacksmith swung his massive hammer at the machine, but an arc of energy blasted him backwards into the far wall. The device grew so loud it drowned out their shouting. One of the other men had a different idea how to stop the machine. He stalked towards him, hefting his axe. The old man looked towards the machine. He could feel the energy from the ruby calling to him. It was going to work this time. None of this was ever going to happen. The man's axe plummeted towards the wizard's head, but the machine grew so bright that it washed out all sight, just before it exploded. The floor was cold against his skin. As he rose to his feet, he realized that his joints didn't pop or ache. It worked. He had awoken on the floor of the childhood bedroom he had shared with his 4 older siblings. If his calculations were correct, he was only 10 years old. It was too dark to see his hand in front of his face. The sun must not be up yet, but he would bet his mom was already in the kitchen making them all an enormous breakfast. Even in the pitch darkness, he could find his way to the door. He knew this little house better even than he knew his workshop. His workshop, all that work, lost. It was okay. He could do it again. He would do it even better. This time he wouldn't let his magic hurt anyone. His siblings would have the chance to grow old with him. He hurried to where the door to the main room of the house should be, but instead of worn wood, he felt only cold stone. Instinctively he pulled out his wand. As he held it, he realized that it shouldn't exist. His wand wouldn't be crafted for several more years. He spoke the old word for light. A small but incredibly bright mote of arcane energy danced from the end of his wand. He wasn't in his childhood bedroom. He was in a small chamber with translucent, ruby-red walls. Outside the walls were very familiar-looking shelves and tables. It was a gargantuan replica of his workshop. He looked down at his hands. They were just as wrinkly and weathered as they had been. As he stared out at his workshop, he saw a giant version of himself lean its face down close to where he stood.
Excruciatingly inadequate again.
It croaked.